j'arrive, j'ouvre, hold my edge, dit vocal.
Right, good evening everyone and welcome to OCAST, your island gateway to all things geek. I'm your host tonight, Carl McDonald, and in a rare reappearance, Hereward, you're joining us tonight.
Yeah, thanks so much. I've been pulled out. They tried to get out, but they pulled me back in again. I'm absolutely so excited. I'm trying not to fanboy all over the place. It can be an unfortunate thing, but yeah, I'm so excited that we've got legendary game designer Howard Scott Warshaw with us here today. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. I am truly looking forward to being had.
For those who don't know, Howard worked for Atari in the 1980s when the VCS or the 2600 system was dominating the gaming scene. And Howard, in the space of, I think, 2 years, is it? Or was it all three games were released in 1 year? Is that right, Howard?
Well, they were developed over the course of about 18 to 20 months, and they were mostly released in 82 because Yars was the most tested game in the history of Atari games, which was interesting. So that delayed the release. That's a whole nother story. I got plenty of stories for you.
We look forward to hearing them. So Howard has been responsible for three of Atari's, the 2600's most famous games: Yars Revenge, Raiders of the Lost Ark, which I believe is the first video game adaptation of Indiana Jones, but it's also the first
of any movie.
First video game adaptation of any movie, and also then E.T., which we'll come to in a bit.
But yeah, that was another movie.
I'd like to start with Yars Revenge.
I did. Why not?
Really want to say is I love Yars Revenge. Thank you for Yars Revenge. It is such a unique...
You're welcome. Thank you. I never get tired of hearing that, strangely enough.
It is such a unique game. For those who aren't totally familiar with the Atari VCS or the 2600, it was very much a kind of pew-pew system. The graphics were very basic. There was pink bleeps and squeaks and all manner of sound effects, but it was not a sophisticated... At the time, it was very sophisticated, but to modern gamers' eyes, it looks like something that has crawled out of the primordial ooze. But Yars Revenge, I think, out of the hundreds of games that are on the system, is definitely up there. It's one of the best, if not the best, game on the system. And it's so unique. It's so unlike anything else on the 2600. Very much 2600 was just reams and reams of Space Invaders or Phoenix kind of clones. And then Yars Revenge is this far more complex fixed screen shooter, but it has such interesting mechanics. So I'd just tell us a bit about how Yars came about.
Well, Yars Revenge was my favorite. Interestingly, it was originally assigned as a coin-op conversion of a game called Star Castle. But all the things that you mentioned, the dynamic visuals in it, the different sort of gameplay, the different screen orientation, there were a lot of things that were firsts in the industry in Yars Revenge, many of which went on to become standards. And you mentioned, well, what was I trying to do or where was I trying to go with it? I wasn't just trying to make a game. I was trying to make a splash. But this was my first opportunity to make a video game for Atari. And what was super important to me was to establish myself as a credible video game designer. This was a time when nobody knew what a video game designer was. It was a brand new thing to do. But I knew I needed to do it. I needed to do it there with the people who were doing it. And so my goal with that game was to do something that just grabbed people and pulled them in. I wanted to use every aspect of the system. I wanted to innovate graphically. I think I innovated in the sound area as well, because, most people came to Atari from home computer hobbyist world. I came there from a math and economics background and a film buff. And so when it came to producing entertainment on the system, I never really looked at it as a program. as much as I looked at it as a very limited resource to provide a maximum entertainment impression. And if you think about Yars Revenge, I hope it's apparent from the things you see in Yars that that's where I was coming from, because I developed some really interesting visuals, some stunning effects, and early on in the development, I had those things that looked really cool, and people would come up to me and go, wow, that's really cool. I've never seen something like that before. What does it do? And I'd say, I don't know yet, because I was just putting these things on the screen because I wanted there to be something stunning first and then figure out what to do with it. And so step by step, it was this incremental process of finding something that's striking and then finding a way to enhance it and then finding a way to work it into the play and then go back to the visuals and then back to the play. It was very much an incremental, iterative process, but the goal was always very clear, and that was to do something that was not just glittery, but something that was unusual, something that was unique, something people hadn't seen before, and something that was compelling. An audio-visual overload is what I was really going for. So I guess that's a fair introduction. By the way, I should say that if you're really interested in everything that Yars Revenge went through, which is a long story, it's all right here in this book, Once Upon Atari, How I Made History by Killing an Industry, by me, Howard Scott Warshaw. And so this book is available throughout Scotland and the EU, and it's an ebook. It's a paperback, and it's also an audiobook, and I read the audiobook. So I just wanted to take a moment to make sure people were clear about where they could find more information about Yars Revenge and Raiders of the Lost Ark and the entire E.T. development and the trajectory of my life, both before and after Atari. That trajectory was totally not only altered, it was abused and refocused and worked and tumbled over. My Atari is still impacting my life. It was one of the most amazing experiences a person could go through. Unbelievable place to be.
And
And
as we can see,
any of the sequels of Yars Revenge, with the exception of Game Boy. The Game Boy, which was done by Mike Micah, the first Game Boy Yars Revenge, I did consult with Mike Micah and helped him develop some of the algorithms and things like that to operate Yars. But after that, I'm actually kind of proud to say I haven't had anything to do with any of the Yars Revenge sequels, because in my opinion, they're all just minor reworkings of the basic gameplay I did. I have a design for a Yars Revenge sequel that I'm talking to Atari about dealing with now. That's an actual new gameplay, which to me, a sequel of Yars Revenge should have new gameplay, not just revamp the old gameplay. But that's just me.
a thing I wanted to come in there with, like in preparation for this, I watched the documentary about the excavation of the landfill, and
Sorry,
you said, yeah, and in it, is this true? You said, like, well, how did you program the game? You just said you read the code book and then you just worked from that when you made Yars. Is that true?
Well, I read the manual. Yeah, I read the manual.
Yeah.
I got the idea of the system. So the way it happened that was kind of interesting was, first of all, you should know that Atari, how did I get to Atari? I was working at Hewlett Packard in a very staid, classic, software environment, and I was bored to death. I loved computers once I got into computers, and all the passion I found in computers was lost for me at Hewlett Packard in a professional environment. So, and I started to act out. I was a wild man at Hewlett Packard. I was kind of wild at Atari too, but at Hewlett Packard, it was showed more. And one day, one of the people there said, hey, I was telling my wife a Howard story the other day. She said, oh, people do stuff like that all the time where I work. I said, oh, where's that? And she said, he's at Atari. His wife worked at Atari. This was the first time I'd ever heard of Atari as a place to work. I went there, I interviewed, I went through rounds and rounds and rounds of interviews. I thought it went really well. Everything seemed to be right on track. I had background and had expert level in the kinds of real-time programming that they did, which was very unusual back then. And then they rejected me. Actually rejected me. So I initially did not get into Atari, but I knew this was a place I had to be. And so I negotiated. I kind of pushed my way in, and I negotiated myself a 20% cut in pay and also a probation. I put myself on probation for a while. And I was just willing to do anything to get in to prove I could do it. I said, let me in. I'll do anything. I'll do whatever you say. Just give me a chance. I know this is going to be a good match. And so they did give me a chance. And after a few days, I read the manual. Then they gave me an assignment, Star Castle, to convert that game. I started to look at it and I realized that game was going to suck on the 2600. It was a vector coin-op game that was so maladapted for the 2600. It was just going to be horrible. And I couldn't afford to have my first game be horrible. I just wasn't going to do that. So on probation, on like my 4th or 5th day working there, I go into my boss's office and I say, the assignment you gave me, I'm not going to do it. I don't think it's a good idea. But I didn't just say I don't want to do it. I had drawn up some designs and I had the concept of what became Yars Revenge. And I presented that. I said, here's something that I think takes advantage of some of the game mechanics that work. It gets rid of some of the game mechanics I think that don't work. And I think it's much better adapted for this system. How about this? And to his credit, he said, okay, give it a shot. Go ahead and they let me do it. They let me, and this was a license. So to walk away from a license a few months later would have been unheard of at Atari. But he gave me the latitude. And so I started working, and it wasn't Yars Revenge at that point. It was just this thing Howard's working on, because it wasn't Star Castle anymore. And it wasn't Yars Revenge yet, because how it becomes Yars Revenge is a whole nother fun story later on. That was my plan to outmarket marketing. But I just started making a game that I thought I would enjoy playing, because I thought, I like games. If I make a game I think is fun, that I think is cool, it'll probably be okay. And that was my development ethos as I started the march through Yars Revenge. I hope that answers your question.
It does. It does. And you mentioned that the Yars Revenge was very heavily play tested. But one thing I've heard is that in these play tests, it actually transpired it was really popular with with women. And this has continued to be the case. And I'm thinking this is very similar to what we know about Pac-Man. Pac-Man was such a success because it appealed to both men and women. So what is it about Yars Revenge, do you think, that appeals to women?
Well, it's interesting you say that. I mean, at the time, yeah, it was a big thing in the video game industry, is that women were way underrepresented in the playership. And they wanted to know, how do we get women more involved with games? And Pac-Man, everybody looked at Pac-Man and saw, there's a game that really appeals to women. Women love Pac-Man. Women also like Centipede, which was the only coin-op game that was designed by a woman. But Pac-Man was the standout game to appeal to women. So then Yars Revenge, when it was time to try and release it, there was someone in the company who was against the game. I don't know why. I don't know what was going on in their head, but there was a person at Atari who had the ear of upper management who was against the game. And they kept saying there's problems with the game, and they would test the game and they would test the game, and it all came out fine. I was, okay, so let's go. Let's release the game, because getting your first game released is a big thing. There is a rite of passage at Atari that you need. I needed. And I kept getting there, and everyone was excited about the game, and everybody thought it was a great game, and here we go. And then, okay, so we're going to release the game. They go, oh, wait, somebody says there's a problem with long-term playability. So now they want to do another test. And it would clobber the test. It would do great in the test. And then it go, okay, here we go. Went through several focus groups. So finally they commissioned a play test. Now, a play test is where they actually get 100 people to come and play the game across all demographic groups. And they come and they play the game, they play the test game, and they play it against a control game. And they rate both games. So I'm thinking, okay, here we go. This is the big test. And the big question in a test like this is, what's the control game, right? What's the game you're going to test against? Because, I believe if you're going to be the best, you need to beat the best, right? I mean, if you're going to be the best, you have to beat the best. That's what they say. However, if they would have picked a really second-rate title to check it against, I would have been totally fine with that, because I don't need a big challenge. I need to get my game out. And the word comes down, and the game they're going to test it against is Missile Command on the 2600, which I think is one of the best It was the hottest game at the time. I think it was it was done by my friend Rob Fulop, who's an amazing designer, and it's just a wonderful, really faithful delivery of that game. And I thought, I'm screwed. And so, but I went to the play test and I'm all set. I have a degree in statistics, so I was ready to work the numbers on this test. And here comes the first sheet. And the first sheet is they just trash Yars entirely. They love Missile Command. They trashed Yars Revenge. I'm thinking, oh God. But that was the worst sheet for Yars in the entire test. And if the whole test, when the smoke cleared, Yars Revenge beat Missile Command in the play test. And then it was finally, okay, we're going to go. So I finally relieved. I had a case of what you call releasus interruptus. I just couldn't quite get the game out. Then finally, there it was. So the game went out. But in the demographics, there's 4 demographic groups basically that they look at. And that's, girls and boys and women and men, adult women and men. Those are the 4 groups. And all the groups liked it really well. But the one group that liked it more than any other group was adult women. Now, this meant a lot to me because I've spent a lot of my life trying to appeal to adult women. That's always been something I thought was a good idea. And so I really felt good about it. And people would ask me, well, why? Why did Yars Revenge, of all things, appeal to adult women? And the only thing I really think of is you look at Pac-Man and you look at Yars Revenge, they really don't have a lot in common. But there's one thing they profoundly have in common.
I know what you're going to say.
What is it?
It's eating, isn't it?
Exactly. It's eating. In Yars Revenge, you must eat away the shield to enable the Zorlon cannon to win the game. In Pac-Man, eating is the way you relate to the entire world. That's all you have is a mouth. And so I just thought it was very interesting. So I figured that's it. So if you really want to appeal to women in video games, you have to do it bite by bite, as they say. That's a very computer joke.
Of course, Howard, we could get very Freudian about this, couldn't we?
But it was interesting. And then I had a conversation with the marketing people. And they said, hey, you've been clamoring for a game for women. Here's a game for women. How are you going to market this to adult women? I think that's really cool. And the marketing guy said, oh, we're not. And I said, why not? And he says, because it's a space action shooter. And I said, yeah. And he goes, well, women don't like space action shooters. And I said, but your own testing says they like this game. And he goes, no, we're not. No, women don't like these games. So we're not going to do that. And it was like, oh my God, that conversation is a microcosm of one of the real things that was difficult at Atari, which was the interdepartmental friction and consternation that would come about when we would talk to them about marketing or when they would talk to us about tech. It was like, it never made any sense what we heard from them. And they kept demanding things from us that were absurd. And there was no appreciation for how much we were getting out of the machine. Like, Harold, like you were saying before, it's like most of the games up to that point were like beep, bloop, blop, and, just straightforward falling stuff and very simple animations. And then when we started to really develop techniques like in Yars Revenge and in some of the games that started to come out where it was much more generous, it was a lot of work and a lot of ingenuity to create that, to pull that out of the machine, a machine that nobody thought would do more than 8 or 9 games in the beginning. The designers of it figured it had like 8 or 9 different games in it. And we were getting to hundreds of games. And there was a lot of animosity between engineering and marketing because we thought they were like surface level, simplistic, ridiculous, oafish kind of people. They thought we were a bunch of entitled, undisciplined, unruly, rambunctious, just can't think of the word, just sort of like just crazy running around children who were being indulged. And except we kept putting games out that were selling a lot. But outside of that, we seemed really unreasonable. And they were driving a tremendous amount of sales through marketing and stuff like that. We couldn't figure out how they did it because when we would talk to them, it seemed like they were insane or just totally unaware of the product. And so that's another thing that I do talk about quite a bit in the book, that a lot of people I've got a lot of feedback on this, I described the actual infighting and how to deal with the interdepartmental conflict between engineering and marketing. A lot of people have come to me, not just in games, but in software development in general, who say that the things I described there still ring true in their companies today. And it's true. And it's one of the reasons why I became a therapist, right? A lot of people think it was a very unusual move to go from being a programmer to being a therapist. And to me, it seemed like a very natural evolution, because if you think about it, programmers and therapists, we're all systems analysts, right? It's just that I've moved on to a more sophisticated hardware in the human brain. And the other great thing about it is brains don't really change that much every 4 years. There's no Moore's law for psychology. It's like in computers, you keep having to relearn everything every few years. It's just kind of a pain. I figured, individuals can change, but people don't really change over time. And I just thought that was an easier thing to deal with until I started doing it.
Obviously, Yars Revenge sold millions of copies. And your second game, which we have to talk about, Raiders of the Lost Ark, I'm going to make a confession, Howard. I sucked at that game. When I got hold of a copy, I got an unboxed copy, and it came without a manual. I don't know. What am I doing? I couldn't make head nor tail of it. And I knew I had a good game on my hands. I just didn't know how to play it. I went online and found a guide to play it, and it helped. But before I get to the game's complexity, obviously this was the first licensed movie adaptation, the first Indiana Jones game. Indy was a household name at that point. The movie had come out the year before, is that right? Or 2 years before? Was there a lot of pressure to get it right?
Well, yeah, but what does get it right mean? Right? That's the tricky thing. There was a lot of pressure. I felt a lot of pressure. So my first game was a big success. And now I get to do the first movie to game conversion. So there's a lot of pressure. I mean, there's a lot of expectation on the part of people out in the world, but the real pressure was going on in my head because I thought, maybe I just got lucky with Yars. Am I a one-hit wonder? The insecurity starts to bubble up, right? And it was a very lonely place to be in a lot of ways. It was an honor to be there, and it was great to be selected. And, Spielberg had to interview the programmers to pick someone to do Raiders. And that was one of the most amazing days of my life, was the day I went to go interview with Spielberg to see if I was going to be the one to do Raiders of the Lost Ark. A story which is covered extensively in the book Once Upon Atari, I'd just like to say. Because I had to fly down to LA and go to Warner Brothers Studios, to their lot, to show up for the interview. And I'm 400 miles away. I actually had to take an airplane, and then when I got up early, took an airplane to go down for a 9:30 a.m. interview. I got there, I show up, and I walk in, and the receptionist is there, and I go, hello, and they just look at me, they go, hello, Mr. Warshaw, your interview has been rescheduled to 3:30 this afternoon. I'm like, what? I flew here. I have a flight back. And, but I'm a make lemonade kind of guy. I mean, it's like, at first I thought, what? Your 6-hour delay? But then I thought, I am a huge movie and television fan. I'm here in the middle of Warner Brothers Studios. And so first I just said, look, can you fix my ticket? I need a later flight back. And she said, oh, no problem. And she took my ticket. I was going to fix that up. And I said, is it okay if I just wander around the studio until 3:30? She goes, oh, sure, go ahead. So I got to spend a whole day unescorted, walk free reign, going all over Warner Brothers studio before meeting with Spielberg. I mean, I jumped into sets. I stole things off of sets. I went everywhere. This was like an amazing opportunity for me. And at the end of it, I get to see Spielberg. And then I do show up, and there's Steven Spielberg, and we start chatting. We played some Yars Revenge, and he liked Yars. And we were talking, it was going well. I thought we were establishing a nice rapport. And then it occurred to me, Stephen, I have this theory about how you're actually an alien yourself. Would you like to hear it? And he's like, yeah. And so I laid out, I had this whole theory about how, the aliens aren't going to just show up in a spaceship. If they're smart enough to get here and observe us, they're going to send an advanced team to culturalize us to get us ready. And in the early 80s, it really felt like that's where we were. And one of the major reasons was Close Encounters of the Third Kind. So I explained to him how I think, they're going to have an advanced team, and he's like the production arm of the team, and he makes these movies that show aliens in a positive light, and his marketing team makes sure they're seen everywhere, all over the planet, to get everybody on Earth ready to receive the aliens. And I said to him, first of all, I said, great idea, great team, and you're doing a great job. And so that's what I told him. And then we sort of wrapped up the interview, and then I went back home, and the next morning, he just called into Atari. He just said, Howard's going to do the game. And I think calling him an alien is what got me to do the game. But now Steven Spielberg, my idol, who I now have to do a job for, who I have to do a work for, that's a derivative work of one of his definitive super hits. Holy crap.
Yeah, but what a game. I think, when I look at Raiders for the 2600, it's not your standard kind of adventure game, just running from one side of the screen to the other, hammer the button a few times. There's a sophisticated kind of inventory system. There's puzzles. There's, taking things from one place and to another. And unlike Adventure for the 2600, where you can only carry one item at a time, you can carry 6. So you're juggling all your inventory and stuff. Wow. What a game. I hear it was a very deliberate choice not to make it a kind of action game.
Right. To me, it was clear that it needed to be an adventure game. And my goal, I always have a goal with each game. My goal with Yars Revenge was to establish myself and really break new ground and show people I can not only make a game, I can make a splash. I can really do something. I wanted to have credibility. And then with Raiders, my goal was to make the biggest adventure game on the 26 anybody could imagine, possibly. And that doesn't mean just taking one screen and replicate it, like 255 times, with whatever, just to replicate that. To me, that's not making it big. That's making it long. But I want to have new, fresh gameplays, different things to do, different ways of approaching a game, period. And also, Adventure was a genre-defining, real breakthrough kind of game. Adventure was a simple game, but it was brilliant. And it really, it established, it was a killer app, right? Because it showed people a whole different idea about gaming, how you could engage a game. And so if I'm going to stand on the shoulders of that and make a sequel adventure game, it has to go farther. It has to go beyond, because each game has to be a contribution. That's where I was coming from. So I want to do something that was the biggest adventure people could imagine. I used 2 controllers for one person. I made inventory control an actual part, and that's gameplay. And I specifically, one of the most controversial choices in the game was that I fixed it so the controller that's normally the first controller that everybody goes as the default controller, I made that the inventory controller. You couldn't move with that one. You had to use the other one. And it was a way of cueing people to say, look, there's going to be things about this game you're not used to. So you need to look, you need to find information. And this was also pre-internet, so you were able to go online, find the manual, get that going. People couldn't do that back then. I pity the fool who had to play that game without the manual back in the 80s. But this was all specific, intentional stuff in my head to do what I felt was the most breakthrough version of an adventure game I could think of.
The one thing I'll say about Raiders is it does have the best animated legs on the 2600. Indy's legs are beautifully animated, but I think to modern audiences and for some 2600 games, the graphics are more symbolic, perhaps, than completely representative. I wonder if it was. I've often found myself thinking the gameplay in Raiders is so fantastic. Was there any demand to have it like an updated version for the later Ataris, the 7800, something like that? Was it a kind of one and done?
No, it was pretty much a one and done. Most of the games on the 2600 were one and done. So I never heard of anybody trying to do more with Raiders. Just like, some people do ask for it, but at least around Atari, no one ever regretted they didn't do ET or wanted to do something else with ET.
I just think that the mechanics of Raiders is so interesting, but with a graphically more capable system like the 7800, it could have been a game that's really absolutely knocks it out of the park for the system.
Absolutely. It would have been, I mean, you could do a much nicer version of Raiders. I could make it even bigger. Some of the stuff could be more representational and clearer. Also could have game hints in the game, which would have been a wonderful thing to do.
Okay, we're going to move on to E.T. It's often called, I think very unfairly called, the worst game ever made. I think that is, and a lot of people will say it's the worst game on the system. And again, I would disagree with that. I personally think there are many, many worse games for the 2600. I had quite a lot of fun with E.T. once I got used to it, and once I figured out how to avoid falling in the pits and stuff like that. But
thank you.
It's a remarkable achievement though, because you programmed this one in 5.5 weeks. Tell us a bit about it.
Actually, 5 weeks and a half day. Yeah, it was, I found out I was going to do it on July 27th, and I delivered it late in the evening of August 31st, and it was approved for manufacturing September 1st.
And Spielberg approved it himself, I hear.
Absolutely. I insisted on it.
Yeah. Did he fall in the pits a lot?
When he played it, he fell in a fair amount, but he was able to work out of it too. He really didn't have much of a problem getting out and going on with the game. It was actually pretty impressive.
Falling in the pits is part of the game. You know, people are like, oh, I fell in the pits. It's like, well, that's like saying I was in a maze in Pac-Man. That's how the game's played. It's the mechanics.
Exactly. The pits are an inherent part of the mechanics and have to be, because that's where the replayability came in. To do a game in that short amount of time, what you need is a smaller game that you can replay, like a Sudoku or a tic-tac-toe in a very simple version. There are some games that aren't meant to last. They're meant to play and play again and play again and play again. The idea behind E.T. is that it's a series of treasure hunts. It's a series of things where you have to locate something, put it together, and then do something with it that takes you to the next step. You have to assemble the phone pieces, and you have to find them where they are, put them together, and then you have to find the place where you're going to call home. And when you find that, you execute the call home. Then you have to go and find the landing spot. And when you find the landing spot, you have to organize it so that you're there alone without any of the humans, so that they will come and pick you up. And so it's a sequence of those. And as long as you have enough places to hide things, you can randomly redistribute them. People can play it again. And if the basic treasure hunt is fun, people get immediate gratification from running through it again and again and again, which a number of people have. I agree with you that it's not the worst game on the 2600, but I have to tell you, I do prefer when people do identify it as the worst game on the 2600. And I'll tell you why. Because, Yars Revenge is frequently cited as one of the best games on the 2600. So as long as E.T. is the worst game on the 2600, they have the greatest range of any game designer in history.
Yeah, you're bookending the 2600 then, aren't you? I love it.
Yeah, love
okay,
that.
whilst we're on it then, if we leave Yars Revenge as the best out, and we leave E.T. as the worst out, what do you think? I mean, the 2600 had a huge library, and I did want to talk a bit about it, because I think it's a great system for collectors, particularly collectors on a bit of a budget, because it's not an expensive system to collect for. And with the recent release of the 2600 Plus that has a HDMI port, and you can go to town. What do you think is the best and worst game on the system other than your own?
Best game, there's a number of pretty good games on the system. Do think Rob Fulop is a designer who I really respect on this system. And he did the Missile Command version. I think Demon Attack is an extraordinary good game. I really like that game.
So fast, Demon Attack. It's, that's a cracker.
It's a beautiful game. It's really well done visually. He does a number of things also innovating. I have an eye for innovation. I respect that. I want to create it, and I want to do something breakthrough. I want to break new ground with each game, and I respect games that do that. I think Kaboom is a great game also. It's a very simple game, but it's compelling. You run back and forth. It's one of those games that sucks you in, and it's a game you sit down to play for 5 minutes, and then suddenly it's an hour and a half later, you think, what happened? It's a game you can lose yourself in, and I like that. In terms of horrible games, I can't use E.T.
Let you use it. You've mentioned.
I would say Firefly is probably one of the worst.
You've mentioned two games there: Demon Attack, which was published by Imagic, and Kaboom, which was Activision. Now, I want to take a little moment on Imagic games because they didn't have a huge library, but they put out my vying with Yars Revenge. My favorite game on the system was Dragonfire. I don't know if you ever played that one. It's a unbelievably fast-paced little kind of, I don't know, Twitch game basically. But then Activision, obviously they did Kaboom, but they did, I'm wondering, was there really any animosity between you guys in Atari and Activision, who kind of were the new kids on the block and came along and just made some absolutely amazing games for the system?
Well, okay, so the formation of Activision and Imagic and the whole history of all of that stuff is covered at length in my book, Once Upon Atari, How I Made History by Killing an Industry. And it is an interesting story because they were all started out of Atari, right? Activision was formed by what were the top 4 programmers of the time at Atari. And then a few years later, Imagic was formed by 3 more successful programmers at Atari and some programmers from the Intellivision system, rather. And so Atari had a history of losing key employees because they really didn't want to pay anybody. Initially, we would have paid to do what we were doing. But after a while, it became so clear that so much money was going on and so little was filtering down to the people who were actually making the games that people left the company to get the opportunity to actually get what they felt was more reasonable pay. And then Atari ultimately ended up having to pay also. Because Todd Fry, the guy who did 2600 Pac-Man and the Sword Quest series, and me, we were going to leave to form another company. And Todd told Atari about it, and then suddenly we got a big bonus plan that worked well. And so we ended up staying there. Otherwise, Raiders and E.T. might not have happened the way they did. But yeah, and one thing about E.T., there's a couple of great things about E.T. is the ironies, because there's a lot of irony around the E.T. project, Atari in general. But the 2 great ironies of E.T., one is that a game that was all about pits wound up in a pit. If you saw the Atari Game Over, that to me is one of the great ironies of E.T. The other one is that E.T., another unusual thing about E.T., I mean, E.T. also, even though I only had 5 weeks, I still wanted to break new ground with the game. So E.T. is the first game that has like location specific power-ups, right? You don't have just one power throughout the game. Where you go, your powers shift depending on where you are. So you have different abilities, and that factors into the strategy. And also it's a 3-dimensional world. I think it's the first 2600 game that actually is played in a 3-dimensional world that holds up if you follow it. But it's a totally non-violent game. Right? No one gets killed or maimed or anything like that. E.T. is a totally non-violent game. And so one of the great ironies is that a non-violent game is responsible for killing the industry for those years. So I love irony. So I just thought it was interesting.
I think it was established, like, at first E.T. sold really well. So when did you become aware of the backlash? How did you become aware? And then at the time, how did you take it?
Really good question. Really good question. Yeah, because this was pre-internet, and people have a hard time conceiving of pre-internet now. So before the internet, what it meant was when you finished a game, it was going to be several months before anybody got the game, right? So I finished the game for September 1st. It didn't hit shelves until mid-November. So nobody saw it before then except for our internal testing. And then it was a huge Christmas present, which meant a lot of people bought it as a Christmas present. So a lot of people bought the game, but no one had played it yet. They didn't open it until Christmas. It wasn't until like right after Christmas and into January that the massive feedback started to come back. Now, the other thing is because there's no internet, you don't drop a game. You put it out on shelves in stores and people buy it and take it home and play it. And they don't have an online forum to go and give the feedback, right? So you don't get this massive wave, but there was a lot of word of mouth that there were problems with the game, that people didn't like it. That started to come back about February. It was around February when I started to get feedback that there were some issues with the game. There were some returns coming back. People weren't that happy with it. And so you have to remember, so since the previous September, so this is like 5.5 or 6 months after I'm done with the game. I'm working on other games. I'm trying to develop new stuff. My head has been so far away from that when this comes up, it's like, it's kind of, it feels to me like old news, although it's fresh in terms of the market and what's going on. And the reviews would start to come out, but those were slow because the gaming magazines only came out like once a month, right? So all the information, all the feedback was delayed. And because there's no internet, there's no drop and there's no update. So whatever you put out on the 2600 back in then, whatever you put out, that was it. No one's going to go remanufacture the card to fix a bug or something like that. So the pressure wasn't just to do a good game. The pressure was to finish it, and it's a drop dead date, and you cannot do anything else with it. So it was also a little tougher then. There was a lot of pressure. There was a lot of pressure, especially when the money started to increase and we started doing bigger and bigger licenses. I'll tell you, one of the things Atari was an amazing place to work. I mean, amazing, with really cool people doing really interesting stuff. But there was a lot of pressure and not everyone could handle it because there were more nervous breakdowns in that department at Atari than any place I've ever worked in Silicon Valley over like 30 years. People, occasionally you would go in and you would literally find someone catatonic in their office, just sort of staring blankly at something. We actually had people carted away. We actually had people had to come and help them out and take them away to facilities where they could heal. But it was fun. It was wild. It was exciting, but it was also brutal, and it took a toll on all of us.
Another thing with I've been watching the documentary Atari Game Over just recently for, I think, the third time I've seen it now. But obviously, knowing we were going to do this interview, I thought I better swat up again. Obviously, it was a complete urban legend for ages that Atari had buried all of these consoles and controllers and copies of the game in the desert. And then the documentary, for those that don't know, it looks at how these were excavated and stuff. And you play quite a big role in this. What was that like for you as an experience, watching your game get dug up out of the ground?
It was intense. It was intense. I mean, if you see the movie, you will see the emotional reaction that I had. And honestly, I've seen the movie quite a few times, as you might well imagine. And I'll tell you, every time I see that part of the movie, I still get choked up. And some people at the time thought, I'm getting upset because my games were in the dig, and I never thought they were. But the reasons I didn't think they were there were practical reasons, not emotional reasons. When the game came up, and there it was, I had a deeply emotional reaction. But it wasn't about the idea that my game had been buried. That wasn't it at all. What it was I'm there in the middle of a crowd. This is in the middle of a dump. This is a city dump in the middle of the desert in Alamogordo, New Mexico. I don't know how often you go to dumps. I've gone to dumps occasionally. I've never seen a line of people waiting to get into a garbage dump. But that day when we went there were over 400 people who were all lined up waiting and eventually came into the dump as the day progressed. And there was this huge throng, this huge crowd, and there were local officials, and there were food trucks, and there were all kinds of people there. But there was the film people, there were the construction people who were digging everything up. But most of these people were fans. They were classic gaming fans. And so when the game actually came up, it was so exciting was so exciting. Everybody was cheering and yelling, and people were really happy. And it was just, and what I realized in that moment, it took me back to, like I said before, the way I came to games was different from the way a lot of the people who made games came to games. To me, it was about films. It was about a broadcast medium. I always felt games were a broadcast medium. And, when you think of producing media, like, a podcast, it's like, what's your goal with a podcast? What's your goal with a piece of media? To me, my goals with a piece of media is threefold. I want to entertain, I want to inform, and I would like to generate social discourse. And if I can do all three of those with a piece of media, I feel that's a tremendous success. And in that moment, with all these people cheering and people from news outlets all over the country, and in some cases around the world, were there to cover this event. And here it is, it's happened, and they found it, and waha. So the urban legend is kind of true. It wasn't perfectly true, but to see that crowd going, and what I realized in that moment was this thing, which is just K of computer code, of assembly language code that I had written 30 years earlier, was still generating such interest and such focus and such excitement. And to have been at the center of that and to be the cause of that, how many people who put out a piece of media get to see it still being celebrated 30 years later? Not many. It's a rare opportunity, and it was overwhelming for me. But it was joy. It wasn't disappointment. It was joy I was feeling to have created this fun and this excitement and this positivity. It just meant so much to me. It literally brought tears to my eyes, and it made it hard to speak.
That's brilliant. And I mean, for anyone that's seen the documentary, the novelist Ernest Cline borrows George R.R. Martin's DeLorean and drives it 400 miles to come. I mean, it's quirky stuff like that, but it is
actually
people
George R.R.
celebrating.
Martin had borrowed. It was Ernie Cline's DeLorean that Martin had borrowed for a screening, and Ernie had gone and picked it up, and he was driving it home, but stopped at the Alamogordo on the way.
Yeah, I think. Yeah, you could see that how much it meant to people that they came and spent the day there, even though there was no guarantee they'd find anything. And yeah, it feels like the movie itself, it's 10 years old now or 11 years old, but it's such a celebration of that era of gaming, which has largely been it's not been forgotten, but it's been superseded by the sort of Nintendo era and stuff. But I think it's such an important part of gaming history. And I'm just thrilled to have you here. I've got one more question before we move on to our questions that have come in throughout the thing. I think there's still quite a vibrant homebrew community for the VCS, which I think is absolutely fascinating. And again, as I said, with the advent of the 2600 plus, it's so much more accessible to people. But are there any new games for the 2600 that you particularly like?
There's a group of people that's headed by David Crane of Pitfall fame, which I think is an excellent game, and the Kitchen Brothers, Daniel and Gary Kitchen. And they together they're doing new games on the 2600. They're doing some really excellent stuff. They have new tech that they can use to host the games, and they're still stretching the possibilities and the capabilities of the 2600, which is amazing to me that that's still happening. The idea that someone wants to go and torture themselves in this way to create games on the 2600, because after the 2600, everybody had bitmaps, they had simplistic versions, and it got more and more sophisticated. But the 2600 was the last game that didn't have a bitmap. In the 2600, when you're programming the 2600, you are literally driving the electron beam as it would go across the screen and make modifications at the microsecond accurate level, to be precise, and to make some of the things happen that we were able to make happen on the screen. It was excruciating kind of programming to do, but it's a really fun puzzle to solve. And I think the idea that it's so much of a puzzle and so much of a challenge that's the thing that's keeping this alive. That programming the 2600 was fundamentally different than programming any other kind of machine. And it was a different kind of mental exercise and challenge. And I think people are still enjoying, the reason people are still doing it is because I think they're enjoying that challenge of what's involved to do it. And it's a fun puzzle.
Yeah, I read an excellent book several years ago called Racing the Beam, explaining the difficulties of programming the system. I just wanted to mention, I don't suppose you played Ed Freeze's Halo 2600. So Ed Freeze worked for Microsoft and worked, I think, on the original Halo, and he ported Halo.
I have not played that.
I really recommend checking it out. It's pretty old now, but I think it was about 2010 he brought it out. It is a remarkable achievement to be able to play Halo on the 2600 or a version of Halo. But I'm going to hand over to Cal now for some of the questions that have come in online. Cal.
Yeah, just two remaining questions. As you can see on the screen, do you enjoy games like River Raid and Pitfall?
Absolutely. River Raid was done by Carol Shaw, who was the first female VCS programmer. And then she left Atari and then later joined Activision, where she did River Raid, which I think is a superior game. Absolutely. And Pitfall, there was a contest between Pitfall and Raiders to see which game was going to go into the Smithsonian as representing an adventure. And Pitfall won. Hats off to David Crane.
All right. And there's
Indy's,
one more question.
Indy's legs were better animated than Pitfall Harry. I just want to say that.
It's all in the legs.
Think Indy's legs are better than Pitfall Harry's legs?
My graphics designer, Jerome Demurit, would be very grateful to hear that.
And another question there. Did you ever meet Steve Jobs and Wozniak when you were at Atari?
No, I didn't. I met Woz in an airport in San Jose a couple of years later, but they had left Atari by the time I got there. They did work next door, though, and we stole their sign. The Apple building was right next to the Atari engineering building, and we stole their sign once. And that was, they were not that happy about that.
So we're coming up to the end. So we did actually touch on a few things, Heather, but that's the nature of these things. So we're going into our quickfire round. If you're ready for some kind of not at all serious quickfire questions, Hereward, you can give an answer if you want.
How exciting. Right, go for it.
Right. Well, this is definitely for Howard, this one. What was the best smell you remember from the Atari office?
The best smell I remember from the Atari office was the smell of success when you got a good report back on your game slice.
All right. So here's another. In a therapy session, what's worse, silence or the buzzing sound of Yars Revenge shield?
Silence is more ominous. If I ever heard a client emitting the sound of Yars Revenge, I would be very concerned.
I'll say silence. Silence is okay. And one of the things we learn when we're training as therapists is just to hold that silence. And I think it's a real skill. I personally do prefer the buzzing sound of the Yars Revenge, though.
Right.
It's more of a throbbing, an electronic throbbing, isn't it?
It is. It was made to reflect the sci-fi lab experience of all the 50s sci-fi dramas with the arcing things. That's the origin of it. That's the thinking behind it. So it's very relieving to hear you say it. The throbbing is absolutely there.
Yeah. So next one, what would you consider your spirit animal? Yar, the Raider, or E.T.?
Well, that's a good one. I would say it's somewhere between the Yar and E.T. Okay. Although if you put an A in the middle of E.T., you get Eat, which is really my spirit animal.
Next one up, did you wear a fedora while you were coding Raiders of the Lost Ark?
Not only did I wear a fedora, I had a 10-foot bullwhip. And I got very good at cracking it. And one of the things I used to do is when marketing people or suits would be visiting engineering, I would sneak up behind them and I'd crack the whip and they would like jump out of their skin. And so that was good for relieving some tension, during a tense day.
Okay, this one's for both of you. What's a piece of common technical jargon you wish could be replaced immediately by a psychological term?
I've got that one.
All right.
The piece of technical jargon would be PEBKAC, PEBKAC. And what it stands for is problem exists between keyboard and chair. And the way I would replace that is with personal responsibility, taking responsibility.
Okay.
I gotta confess, I am technologically inept. I'm quite comfortable working with people, but when it comes to technologies, I had a TV when I was an undergrad student many moons ago. For no one in the house, it would fire up. You know, you put it on. It was one of these old cathode ray tellies, you know, big box, and it wouldn't fire up. But we discovered that if I took my left trainer off, and it had to be a specific trainer that I had, it was only my trainer, my left trainer, I could bang the television with the trainer and it would switch on, but it would work for no one else in the house, no one else's shoes. It was just me and my left trainer. I'm sure there's a therapeutic application there, but it's probably not ethical. So,
Okay.
Oh, wait a minute. I have a little surprise. Oh, it's the elephant in the room. What's he saying? He's saying, don't forget to check out Once Upon a Atari, How I Made History by Killing an Industry by Howard Scott Warshaw. So I hope if you've enjoyed you'll check out the book. I think if you like this talk, you will very much enjoy the book.
I'm going to have to check it out. I absolutely love that picture of you on the cover. Fantastic.
Right,
Was that whilst you were programming E.T. or when you'd finished programming
This
E.T.?
This is day 4 of the E.T. project. This is my 25th birthday. I'm in my office, and if you look up here, you can see one of the screens from E.T.
Okay. Right. Two more of the quickfires left. Where are we? When you walk into a room, do you think of yourself as a programmer who talks to people or a therapist who knows assembly code?
Very much a therapist who knows assembly code, much more so. I always felt out of place as a programmer because I was more people-focused.
Okay. And the last one is, what's the ultimate design constraint? 4 kilobytes of ROM or a 50-minute therapy hour?
4K of ROM is a much tougher restraint than 50 minutes for a therapy hour. You can do a lot in 50 minutes with a therapy hour. You can't do nearly as much with 4K of 2600 code.
Perhaps the ultimate constraint is 5 weeks and half a day.
That is the ultimate constraint.
All right. Thank you so much, Howard. And Hereward, do you have a final thought there?
No, I just want to say to Howard, it's been such an absolute pleasure talking to him. As I've said to anyone that would listen in the last week, that when I agreed to do this interview, this is talking to a game design legend. So, Howard, thank you so much for being with us this evening, and it's been a real pleasure.
This was my pleasure, I assure you. Hereward and Cal, thank you so much for having me. This was really wonderful. I really enjoyed it.
No problem. And if people want to reach out to you, if they've got any other further questions or they want to hear any more of well, there's the book, obviously, and if there's any other ways they can get a hold of you.
I'm very easy to find online. You can find me at hswarshaw.com, or you can go to onceuponatari.com and contact me through either of those. And you can find Once Upon Atari all over Amazon or anywhere else, the audiobook or anything else. Please enjoy it and enable me to write another book.
And the chat room just reminded, there's a question that I have left out that we ask of all our guests. Would you consider a visit to the Hebrides?
Absolutely, I would consider it. I'd even do it.
All right, that's great. Well, watch this space. Something might happen sometime in the future. So thank you, Howard. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thanks, Hereward, for you. We don't have you on often these days, but as always, good to see you. And thanks to the chat room for the great questions. And we'll see everyone very soon. Good night.